Hello, everybody, and welcome to the world's greatest licensing podcast. My name is Craig Renti, and I, at least for the next hour, am the world's greatest podcast host. And I am super excited about today's show and today's guest because we have Sally Geyer here today, who is the global CEO for the World Commerce and Contracting Organization. So, Sally, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Craig, thank you very much for having me. You are indeed the world's greatest podcast host, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you today and looking forward very much to the conversation that we're going to be having.
Well, let's see if you still have that same optimism at the end. But there's a lot of pressure on you today because you now have to be the world's greatest podcast guest, at least for the next few minutes. So you have to be amazing, which I know you will be.
Leave it with me, Craig. Leave it with me.
So before we get started, I know you and I spoke the other day. We talked about uh, AI and its influence on contracting. But I was reading through your organization's bio. And can you just tell us a little bit about the World Commerce and Contracting Organization? Because there was something in there that I wanted to talk about.
Okay, absolutely. Well, let me give you a little bit of a potted history. Actually, the name World Commerce and Contracting is relatively speaking new. We rebranded the association's name in 2020. We were previously IACCM, the International Association for Commercial and Contract Management, and we are a 26-year-old now professional membership association dedicated to this field of commerce and contracting, a not-for-profit organization with close to 90,000 members, Craig, now, which is an amazing
Wow.
number. There's still many, many people that we haven't yet reached, and we're looking forward to reaching them. But nonetheless, it's a wonderful community that we serve and we represent across about 180 different countries now and across industry as well. So I often talk about the diversity of our membership being one of its greatest strengths, particularly when we, as an association, we have a vision of a world where all trading relationships deliver social and economic benefit. So you need that diversity of thought. You need representation from both the buy side and the sell side of the contracting process, the pre-award and the post-award environment as well, to really start to address some of the gnarly issues that exist in contracts and contracting around the world as well. So it's an incredible community, and it's an absolute honor to be the CEO of this organization.
Well, it is. I have to add on to that. It is an incredible community. I remember I met the IACCM many years ago, probably 25 years ago. If you're 26 years old, it was probably 25 years ago, where I was working for Oracle and was tapped on the shoulder and said, listen, we know you're running this organization over here, but we want you to run a global contracts organization. So we have to, bring in people who are doing this work all over the world, and we want you to do it. And of course, being 30 years old, I was like, great, I'll do it. And I was like, how the hell am I going to do that? So I went searching, asking people, and a friend of mine, Steve Sopko, introduced me to Bill Huber, who introduced me to Tim Cummins, and that's how I met the IECCM years ago. And I was thinking about sort of that history, and this is, I know we talked about AI the other day, but Tim said something to me that stuck with me, and in a way, I was like, "Isn't this the opposite of contracting? Like, I can't believe this head of the IACCM is telling me this." Because I wanted to bring the Oracle organization into the IACCM. Wanted us to be corporate members, so we're going back and forth, and of course, we had a procurement organization who had contracts that we needed the IACCM to sign. And we wanted Tim and his organization to present to us and come to our meetings. And there was some stuff we were doing together. And Tim goes to me, Craig, I'm going to sign whatever you put in front of me. So don't even worry about it because I know you're going to pay me. So whatever it said. And I was like, this guy's the head of contracting. And he just told me he will sign literally whatever I put in front of him. That is kind of weird. And then I thought about it. over the years about the relationship part. And I know you guys put a lot of effort into talking about relationships, and it's not just the words on the paper, which obviously are very important, but it's also the relationship that you're building between the parties. So, are you surprised that Tim said that?
No, not in the knowing Tim as I do, Craig, not in the slightest. Yeah, president and founder of the association, and he's famously quoted as saying he doesn't like contracts. So we can put that to one side, though. But yes, I mean, I think he what I know about Tim is that he takes the very philosophical view, and he absolutely focuses in on the importance and the quality of the relationship. And of course, we have to be very conscious of the fact that the world is made up of a myriad of trading relationships. What is it? The famous quote from the Nobel Prize Committee when they awarded two wonderful academics, Oliver Hart and Bent Holmstrom, with the Nobel Prize for Economic Science back in 2016. And the quote goes, "Modern economies are held together by innumerable contracts." And that is a very profound statement and very true. But of course, contracts and relationships all exist on a spectrum. And that's the really important point. And I think that goes to the crux of what Tim is talking about, that absolutely, where you have the quality and integrity of the relationship, then that should take precedence. Where you need that relationship, it should take precedence over the contract itself. And we could get into all sorts of technicalities about what we teach actually at World CC, which is about this interconnection between three significant elements. When you think about an agreement, it is more than just a contract. It is about the intersection between the contract, the relationship, and the governance framework that needs to exist within it as well. Now, where you have very transactional, if you like, no human touch contracts, of course, it's the contract that will be dominant. But where you move up the spectrum to where actually the relationship, particularly in very uncertain environments, is really, really important, then the contract plays a much, much less significant part, and the relationship and governance needs to play a far more important part. So contracting is very nuanced, and we really need to think about it holistically. So I think that's fundamentally what Tim would be saying right now if he was here.
Well, and it served me. I think it served me well because, I came from a very contracts background, was a contracts analyst specialist for Oracle, sort of then moved into management and then eventually started my own firm here at Palisade, basically helping companies when contracts go bad,
Yeah.
I would say, right? And there's no good relationship between a technology vendor and our client. But I've seen it in our agreements with our partners or our customers where we want to do some different things and some interesting services and we want to try new things and we loosen up the contract language a little bit to make it a little ambiguous because I know the person on the other side and they've told me they're like, Craig, I'm not trying to screw you here. Like if this becomes overwhelming, we'll do something here, we'll do something there. Now we don't do that all the time, right? Sometimes
No, but of course, and that's the problem with so many contracts today, though, Craig, isn't it? And that's what we talk about a lot as well, that very often, contracts are full of language and text that's not relevant. It's not important. And there's so many elements of that we can talk about. And our research tells us that, you know, we we tend to negotiate or contract for the divorce, not for the marriage. That is that we
Right.
focus our efforts, particularly in negotiations, on all of the things that are going to matter when everything goes wrong. Limitation of liabilities, warranties, and indemnities. These are all things that will come to play when there's a problem, as you say. Um, and yet we know that what our global community say is most important to negotiate is a very different list. It's all about focusing in on what the responsibilities of the parties are, what the scope is of the agreement, how you're going to reach that successful outcome, the vision of the contracting relationship in the first place. So, unfortunately, we recognize regularly that our contracts are not fit for purpose. And I'll just give you a little example on this as well, because we had this through the pandemic. You know, where are we now? I'm going to date this podcast, it's 2025. Um, and 5 years ago, we were in the midst of a terrible pandemic, which disrupted trading relationships all over the world. And what did we discover from that experience? Well, for a nanosecond, people ran to find their contracts. And by the way, they were lucky if they could find them, because
Yes.
they might not have had the key to the filing cabinet that the contract was kept in, for example. If they were lucky enough to find the relevant contract, they went rushing to look for the force majeure clause. But then very quickly realized that that wasn't actually going to help them, because termination probably wasn't really what they wanted or needed. What they needed to do was figure out how to navigate through the complexity and uncertainty that the pandemic was throwing at them. And guess what? There was nothing in the contract that was going to help them. Nothing at all. What did organizations do? They relied on the relationship.
Yes.
Put that
Absolutely.
contract back in the drawer, because it was not fit for purpose. It had nothing in it that was in any way relevant. And they relied on the relationship. And of course, that relationship was necessarily fragile because it depended too much on people, on humans. Now, if you had a good relationship, you'd invested in a particular relationship between two organizations, that was all well and good. But if that didn't exist, that was then a challenge and a problem. So the pandemic really highlighted to us this importance of those three legs of the stool that I talked about: contract, governance, relationship, because we need to ensure that we put in place discipline and certainty around the quality and integrity of the relationship, which is supported by a governance framework. So, it's a tangible example of how we get contracting so badly wrong, and we fill our contracts with things that are just not going to be useful to us.
We we had a client who was negotiating a software contract with a vendor, and I was trying to tell them how much stuff is in this agreement, and they were sort of ignoring me. So I was like, "How do I prove this?" So I just started printing out the contract. I started printing it out. I literally got to 200 pages with all the URLs and sort of, and I stopped. I was like, "This is ridiculous." There were 4 software products on this contract. This was a database contract. This was not sort of a massive billion-dollar implementation. And I put it in the mail, put a stamp on it, put it in the mail and sent it to them. And they're like, "What's this?" I'm like, "That's part of the contract." Like I just stopped printing it, right? But, and all of those URLs, they can, we have a nice visual with some technology vendors where we talk about this is the part of your contract that is static and can never change. And here's all 90% of this stuff can change at any moment. The vendor has embedded URLs. So I'm like, when does this even stop being a contract? Like I always, one of the things you learn is contract is the T's and C's are set. And you sort of agree a meeting of the minds. And now, vendors can do whatever they want in those URLs, and then it's up to someone to stop them, right? So and that's where the relationship, comes in. And again, I'm looking at it from the firefighter perspective, right? People don't call us when everything's going well with their vendors. Oh, we've got a great relationship. The contract's fit for purpose. We're getting good value. They're performing. We want to give you money, Craig. And it's like that doesn't happen. It's always when there's a problem. So, but I just was reading through the WCC bio, and I saw the relationship in there, and I just thought that was because I know we're going to now talk about AI, but um, I just think for me, it's still about even with artificial intelligence coming into our fields here, it's still about the relationship like that. fixes and causes a lot of problems in dispute resolution and contract management and sort of how businesses get things done. It's number one for me, even before AI. If I could say you have a great AI program or you have a great relationship with the vendor, I would pick the great relationship with the vendor
Yeah,
because it just
it is absolutely right. It is, it's so important. And the more you focus on the relationship, the more you can start to discuss and influence what actually is contained in the artifact, which is the contract itself. And yeah, I think Craig, the other thing that's really interesting is that you think about the number of people that are necessarily involved in contracting in an organization. We often, when we talk about contracts, what's the immediate sort of function, if you like, that comes to mind is legal. Well, yes, but of course, legal is just one of many stakeholders in contracting. When you
yes.
think about the pre-award and post-award, yeah, legal typically gets quite involved, heavily involved in that pre-award environment. They're rarely involved post-award until, of course, everything goes horribly wrong and then they get brought back in. But, you know, on average, around 30% of an organization's workforce is involved in contracting.
Really? That
Happening
high?
that high.
Wow. Wow.
Absolutely. And in organizations where outsourcing is high, then it's an even bigger number. So I think it's really, really important for us to reflect on that and think about whether or not we're designing the contracts and the process for that user community. I'm a contracts geek. I'm sure the audience will probably have got that by now. But I'm also passionate about things like user-based design, and thinking about applying that in a contracting environment is super cool, and it is happening. But you're right about the relationship, and you're right about how we should use and leverage that relationship, invest in that relationship in order to improve contracting more broadly.
So I'm also a contracts geek. So let's geek out on some technology and contracts. And I want to roll the time machine back and now after working with Tim and the IACCM and internally, we've got this big contracts organization at Oracle, but everything is manual. I mean, there were offices that had typewriters and fax machines, right? That's how we would use we would print out terms and conditions on pieces of paper, cut them out with a scissor, and use a glue stick and fax them to customers. Like there was just that is sort of where that was. But Oracle was investing in all of these different contract modules. It had like 5 or 6 of them: sales contracts, procurement contracts, delivery contracts, like they had all these different modules. So, and we always wanted to use them internally. We never could because all the internal folks were helping customers, right? And they didn't really, um, we got yelled at for saying you eat our own dog food, so we eventually had to say drink our own champagne. Eventually we did. But I remember the contracts development team. I brought all the leadership from this global organization, had 100 people in the room. I said, why don't you guys come down and tell us what you're doing? It was a disaster because they get in there and they're like, okay, here's what's going to happen. And they put 2 screens up. We're going to have this amazing contracts application, and people are going to fill some stuff in, and it's going to automatically transfer data to the client, who then is going to add some stuff to it, and they're going to hit a button, and it's going to go back to us. And that's how we're going to do commerce. And none of you will really have anything to do anymore. And I'm like, oh my God, you just told my whole team they're going to lose their jobs really soon. So we had to, we were very nice to them, and then I had to unwind that for the next 2 days. It's like, no, none of that is happening. But how close are we to that? Like how close? Um, so I think I told you the story. I sold a car a couple of weeks ago, and I went on to Grok and I said, I need a contract to sell a car in the state of New Jersey. And I wanted to have this kind of tone and have these sort of, I don't ever want to see this person again. And boom, it spit something out. So something that would have taken me maybe a few hours to do some research, or I wouldn't be sure, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and I was done. Like, are we in an existential employment crisis in contracts because of AI? Like, where is this going, this whole AI thing in our contracts world?
Okay. So, gosh, it's such a big question, isn't it? And I guess I'm going to be able to listen back to this podcast in the future, Craig, and find out whether or not my soothsaying and my futurist view is correct or incorrect.
We're going to do that in 2 years. We're going to come back and we're going to rewind the tape and see how well we both did.
Okay. So, what do I think? I think there is no question that the advent of artificial intelligence is going to impact the human workforce. And I think that's a reality that we have to face. And you will hear general counsels and chief procurement officers from big organizations around the world, chief commercial officers talking about the fact that yep, they're investing in artificial intelligence, and yep, they can't guarantee what this is going to mean for the workforce. At the very least, what people are saying at the moment is they're not going to be heavily recruiting new people. Some organizations, and I'm not saying that this is purely in the contracting environment at all, but yeah, we're hearing organizations talk about losing workforce because of the capabilities of artificial intelligence. So I will preface everything I'm going to say with we cannot sit here and not expect there to be some level of impact. That said, I am much more optimistic about how this technology is going to impact this field of work. And here's why. Contracting is arguably the least reformed business process in any organization. Why is that? Because it's ultimately fragmented, siloed, has multiple owners. Nobody really understands what the entire life cycle is. Most often, pre-award in an organization, sorry, well, yes, we'll do both. Buy side doesn't know what sell side is doing, and vice versa. We had one hilarious example where we took one big tech company's procurement agreement and gave it to their sales guys, and they absolutely freaked out.
Yep.
And
We
we
do
took,
that a lot when
there you
people are
go.
buying from us. When we buy from you, we have to do this, and now you want to, and that's very effective negotiation strategy, is going
Yep.
back to the vendor and saying, "Hey, we just took this from your agreement."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so helping connect those dots across organizations, but also, pre-award doesn't engage with post-award. One of our um, infamous, if you like, 10 pitfalls of contracting is poor handover from the deal team to the delivery team, poor handover from pre-award to post-award. How often do you hear and talk or hear people talking about throwing the contract over the proverbial fence for somebody to deliver it?
Oh, not at this company. We would never do that. That never happens. I have no idea what you're talking. This is all new to me. I had no idea.
So that that very fact, this fragmented, siloed process, again, we need to acknowledge. But what that means is that there's tremendous opportunity. Contracting and the process of contracting within organizations is this potential hive of incredible business intelligence, which is untapped because it's been so manual for so long. You've got thousands and thousands of agreements that an organization will sign, has signed, but because they're all on bits of paper stuffed in people's drawers or in filing cabinets, nobody is doing any kind of analysis of whether they're working well or not well and why they might be working well or not well. So that whole performance, or so you talk about the post award, that's the performance of the agreement. What about any sort of measurement and analysis about how long it's taking to get an agreement from um, the sort of initial thought process around we're going to sell this or we're going to buy this through to actual contract signature. So we now, with the technology that is available to us and much more freely available now than it has been before, we have the opportunity to leverage that technology to start to provide real business intelligence to our organizations. And you know what? It's really interesting, Craig, because we we know again from our research, contracts experience an average of now 8.6% value erosion due to systemic inefficiencies and risks. So 8.6% of an organization's annual revenue, or 8.6% of costs associated with operational elements of an organization. That is an astonishing, staggering figure for so many organizations. We can start to address that. We also talk to our global community about what it is that matters to them most. And what we know is that what our community wants to do is to deliver strategic value to their organization. But they're incapable of doing so because of operational overload. They are too busy to deliver strategic value. And we know that they're really busy focused on low value, low complexity agreements. The number of contracting professionals that are still tied down in discussions around non-disclosure agreements, for example, we again have to accept that reality. So with acceptance of the really poor quality of the process today, and actually the low level of very administrative activity that people get involved in, we have the opportunity to change that now. Technology can really change it. So far from removing swathes of the workforce, what I see us being able to do now as contracting professionals is step up into a far more strategic role with technology as a really effective assistant to us, starting to look at portfolio analysis, for example. That artificial intelligence really gives us this tremendous opportunity to look at scale in a way that we couldn't look at scale before. We can't do this as frail human beings, but as human beings with the technology capability by our sides, we can do incredible things, and we can start to realize that aspiration of delivering strategic value to our organizations, because we're going to be delivering this really wonderful business intelligence that will help an organization identify strengths, weaknesses, improvements, continuous improvement, and we will be a really valued resource in the organization.
I live in two different worlds. I have the world I live in now with very small organization, 20 people. I'm doing some of the contracts. We've got one other person doing them. And then I live in the old world where there was 1,000 people working for me in sort of this massive organization. And I'm thinking back to some of the things that I had to do in the old world. And I remember we did so many acquisitions over the years. We're acquiring companies all the time. And one software company acquiring another software company. Well, that software company has thousands of agreements with their customers, and we would have to do the due diligence on that, right? So they would say, Craig, here's 20,000 agreements. You have 1,000 people working for you. Go look through these agreements, and here are the 5 things. And I would imagine that is a perfect use case for some of
Oh,
this newer contracting technology, where we can go through and say, here's, yes, you wanted us to look for these 6 things, but through our experience, we also found these other 4 things. And let's have a talk about these, because we'll bring more value rather than just going through a checklist. And you were talking about sort of inundated with low value work, and these would spike, right? You would have an acquisition, you'd have to do all this work for a few months, and then it goes away. So I would think that's a perfect use case to do this just review and of all these agreements. But and I'm thinking about at Palisade and all of our agreements, they're sitting in Word, well, PDF documents.
Mm.
Very right. That's I'm using the same tool today to negotiate contracts as I did 30 years. We're using Word, Microsoft Word and email, red line back and forth. But at the end of the day, then what do you do with that? Like you were talking about post award, like what do you do with that? Does it sit in a file cabinet? Does it sit now it sits in a folder on a computer somewhere in the cloud, locked down where no one else can get it. But what are you doing with that? I mean, again, I think that's we as contracting professionals have access to all of those agreements. So are we just going to let them sit there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's absolutely right. And in fact, we've already got a wonderful use case. We did a big project with a major government where they were struggling because their risk averse approach to procurement was having the impact of major reduction in the number of suppliers that were willing to bid for work. So that was a massive issue, of course, in terms of particularly in terms of value for money for the citizen of this particular country. So they needed to address that. And as part of the project that we got involved with, we ran an analysis of over 7,000 of this government's signed agreements to assess where projects had gone well and the underlying agreement that had been entered into, but also where the agreement compared to the standard templates that were approved. And even in government, you have this tradition, if you like, of people saving a copy of an agreement, a template on their hard drive, and let's rinse and repeat this agreement, and any updates to it that we might agree seem to sort of get through. And it was fascinating because one of the many things that we uncovered through this analysis, which took, it took a few weeks, but it was way, 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 way quicker than it would have been.
Mhm.
Well, I don't know what self-respecting human being, if you said with present company accepted, Craig, if you said, right, here you go, analyze 7,000 agreements, I mean, I certainly would have turned around and gone, no, thanks very much
Right.
indeed.
You hand it to someone else and have them do the work.
Yeah,
That's how you
it's
do
just
it.
like, but it was fascinating what we uncovered through the analysis. And what we discovered was this government was using the most complex template, the template that was appropriate for the really high value, high complexity, high uncertainty projects for very low value, low uncertainty, high certainty projects. So they were using completely the wrong agreements. Again, back to the fit for purpose or not fit for purpose. But what it uncovered was that there was this sort of philosophy and mentality that said, I tell you what, if I throw the kitchen sink at this, if I use this big agreement, then I've covered every eventuality. But of course, the consequence of doing that was that they were completely eradicating, eliminating their supply base,
Yep.
which was catastrophic. So, wonderful example of how you can run analytics at scale using AI, using wonderful technology that is at our fingertips now, and actually uncovering ways that we are working that are not effective, and what we need to do in order to improve. And in that case, it was about improving the quality of outcomes for the citizen. Doesn't get much bigger than that.
Well, and that problem persists and it's in the commercial space too, because we see it all the time. And so when we're engaging, and it's not every time, but there are certain organizations who are more risk averse than others. Banking
Yeah.
is, healthcare, government. Department of Defense, all those types of agencies. Um, we start with, okay, we need a non-disclosure. We have one. No, no, we have to use yours. That's fine. They send it. It's one way. I'm like, could it just be mutual? Like, I'll sign I'm using Tim. Like, I will sign whatever you want as long as it's mutual. And then they'll send us something, and then they'll say, you know what, we do want to work with you guys. Here's our template. I'm like, are you sure? Because we know how to do this. No, no, we want to use our template. Okay, and it's 200 pages long, and it's a software development slash implementation. I'm like, that is not. And I remember years ago we would redline the heck out of that, and now we're just like, you have with experience, like I know you have an easier template. You have a professional services, easy, and we can add our scope of work into it. But just going through that process with vendors of rejecting one contract, that could add a few weeks onto your, who are these guys telling us they can't use this, right? Everybody, you know, Microsoft signed that thing with us, and they're a huge firm. These guys, and yes, but that was appropriate for your engagement with Microsoft. It's not appropriate for what you're doing with us. So we see that all the time. Is there's just they have a process in place, and because it's the process, and no one asked the question, and sort of no one was involved. No one from the contracting department was involved in the discussion around the business problem. They just threw out the most complex or the thing that covers everything. And so that adds time. And these are, our it's not a life and death thing that we do, but you have vendors knocking on doors and demanding huge amounts of money. And it's a huge problem that they need to, every day that we're stuck in procurement is the day we're not solving a problem for a customer. So you
Absolutely.
sort of
And you know what, Craig, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think as I get older in my role at World CC, actually I have said no to organizations who have said they'd like to sign up as a corporate member, but have then sent us a set of terms and conditions to um, put us as a supplier, I guess, on their systems. And I just, it beggars belief, some of the things that we've been asked to sign. Um, it bears no relevance to a small not-for-profit organization
right.
providing resources very often at no cost to a member, very low cost, and it's training, it's access to research. This is not a complicated relationship. And again, we go back in full circle to that word relationship, don't we? But I've, and I have to refuse because I've said to them, you know, we are all about how to do things better in this space. And so it would be completely wrong of me to sign this agreement because
Right.
it is everything that I stand against. So I can't do this. And I'm a lawyer by background. That was my original training. So I can never really sort of take that hat off. But I would rather say no. And I guess we are fortunate to be able to say, no.
Right.
It's a really low value membership fee, and it's not worth us procrastinating over in totally inappropriate terms and conditions. And I often use it as an opportunity to say, we'd love to help you, and we'd love to talk to you about
Right.
the way that you're approaching this. Yeah.
We have taken a page out of the things that we disapprove of, where we've put certain smaller packages and offerings online, and we say, listen, just click I accept, put in your credit card, and we'll start helping you. Like, because I can't do this for $2,000, right? It's so but it's interesting what you said there, because we are a for-profit organization, so we are not non-for-profit. So we will have, and again, it's usually in the beginning when people sort of don't understand. You've got the procurement organization that doesn't understand the business problem, and they'll come to us with all of these expectations. If we're out of compliance, you have to pay this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this, and they want all these insurances and millions, and it's like a $20,000 deal, and they want millions of dollars of liability. And I was like, listen, I'll take your money. But if you put that in the contract, I'm just going to tell you to buy more with the vendor. Like I have to mitigate my risk. I don't want to do it. You're paying me to fight with the vendor and disagree with the vendor and offer an alternative opinion on sort of how the direction of this dispute will go. Uh, if you put all that in, I can't do that effectively. I mean, I'll sign it, but here's what's going to happen. And then it back off and they say, no, 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 we want you fighting. I was like, all right, then we're still going to do the work really well. And there's liability clauses and all this in there. And we do have insurance and we've never had a problem with a client. But I think, again, that sort of risk aversion and throwing the most complex thing and really gets in the way of those of solving problems sometimes, right? And I'm sure it's at sometimes it's appropriate, but again, not in our little world. If it's a nonprofit organization or sort of we're being paid to disagree with someone, I can't be liable if I disagree with them. That's
Yeah.
exactly, you're so it's so we see sort of maybe from a different perspective, but we're seeing all these issues. So I have a lot of customers I want to send your way because like, your procurement organization needs to talk to Sally, please.
We'd love that. And you know what, Craig? One of the things that is lovely to see as well is sort of turning a sort of positive note on all of this. We are starting to see this tremendous movement in what we term contract design and simplification. And um, there are some burning platforms in this environment which are causing organizations to have to make a change. And I would look at in many instances like the sort of the mining sector, for example, um, uh, energy, oil and gas as well, to a degree where, there's one particular example, and this comes from Australia, actually, one of the big mining organizations in Australia, and part of their license to operate was around engaging more effectively with local communities, local suppliers, and small to medium enterprise. But they were using all of their very complex traditional contracts to try and engage with these local suppliers and these micro or small to medium enterprise or indigenous business. And part of they stood the chance of actually losing their license to operate in the country unless they could demonstrate that they were working and bringing on a specific percentage of their supply base in that category. And so they had to do something, they had to change, and they did. And they transformed one of their supplier templates down to 2 pages because they recognized, and it was like 120 pages before, but they just recognized that they were never going to take these organizations to court.
Right.
It was never going to be a thing. They actually just needed some fundamental elements to enable and equip these organizations to work effectively together. And it has been game changing. And in fact, the lawyer who was involved in this did recently win, I think, Australia Lawyer of the Year award for the work that they did. And we were very proud to be involved as part of that project and to inspire that project. So we are starting to see this movement. I have to confess, it's far more prolific in the Asia Pacific part of the world, in the Europe and Africa environment as well, less so in North America. But nonetheless, it is something that's beginning to take shape, and that's really important too, and it's really powerful. And we continue to really advocate for that movement. So alongside how we can effectively use technology, which we should, we also need to think about how we're simplifying so that we are equipping and enabling that whole ecosystem more effectively.
I love that, from 120 pages down to a few. That's great. I'm going to go look at our contracts now. Start taking things out. Um, I just have sort of just a couple more. I could talk to you forever. This is nerdy contract stuff, but if if I am starting my career in contracts, whether I'm a young person out of university starting, or I'm older pivoting and I'm getting into this profession, um, what like how do I prepare technology wise? Like what do I need to know? What do I worry about? What do I take advantage of? um, how do I get ready for this tsunami of change that I also think is coming and I also think is not all bad. I think some of it's going to be amazing and some of it's going to be difficult and there'll be displacement and there'll be new jobs created and just like every technology, like we just don't know where it's going yet. And I think the more prepared you are, the better. So how do I get ready for it? Like what do I do?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question, and it's not all about technology, of course, is it? But if we focus in on the technology at this point in time, I mean, what I always say, Craig, is we have to take responsibility for educating ourselves. So if you take generative AI as an example, that's available to us on our desktops. Lots of people are using it in a personal environment now. Lots of people are starting to use it in a professional context too. Um, we need to know how it works. We need to be proficient in it. So, you know, it is going to be so important for all of us to be tech savvy, to understand what technologies are available, what technologies organizations are using, to be able to run basic and analytics. It's just going to be really important. And how we leverage desktop tools that are just immediately accessible to us is going to be very important for us to be able to demonstrate. You know, I think we also need to, and World CC has put out so much research in this space. We need to be proficient in the potential impact of technology. You know, there are many organizations who've implemented contract lifecycle management technology. Um, some have done so really effectively. Some have done so with catastrophic effect. So it hasn't worked at all. But, where it has been successful, we see really interesting statistics like a 27% reduction in average cycle time from bid to signature, for example, or a 35% reduction in the average cost of contract development. A 31% reduction in average cycle time to agree post-award contract changes. So we've got some really wonderful statistics, and I think it's really powerful for people, for especially when you're walking into an organization that hasn't really invested in technology yet, and there are still plenty who haven't, then actually equipping yourself with some facts, some data points that say this is what technology can do for us is going to be incredibly valuable. It's going to be really important, bringing new news to your organization. So we've got to educate and equip ourselves on the technology that's available to us. We also have to educate and equip ourselves on the technology that exists and how it can positively impact the contracting space. And then finally, I would say we have to have an adaptive mindset. It is not
Yes.
just about the technology. It is so important for us to remain curious and remain adaptive. This world is changing around us on a daily basis, and there is nothing that's going to stop that. So we have to have our eyes wide open and we have to roll with the punches and be adaptive to the changes that are happening around us.
That is so true. And it's not just contracting, but it's delivery and sales and marketing and development. And I think we are on the precipice of lots of change. So I'm always trying to look ahead, go to where, what did Wayne Gretzky say? Skate to where the puck is going, not to where it is. Like that's where we're trying to skate to. Um, this has been great. I have to say, for the last hour, you have been the world's greatest podcast host.
And you've been the
Guest.
greatest podcast host, Craig. There you go.
Thank you. So if I am an individual or a leader in a big organization or small organization and I want to know more or get involved with WCC, what do I do? How do I do that?
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's very easy. Just look up World Commerce and Contracting. We will come up. We're all blue, our branding and our logo. So World Commerce and Contracting, it's www.worldcc.com. And also look me up on LinkedIn because I'd be delighted to connect with anyone who is interested in connecting with me personally as well.
Excellent. Highly recommend both connecting with Sally and the WCC. Great organization. Thank you again, Sally, for joining us. And we're going to book you for 2 years from now. And then we're
Okay.
going to go back and rewind the tape and we're both going to cringe. We're going to be like, oh, we were both wrong. So have a great day, Sally. And everybody, thank you for listening. See you next time.
Take care.